They're going up to the Temple Mount, and the most prominent rabbi at the time, Yohanan ben Zakkai, he starts talking to Vespasian, and he's saying a mighty king was prophesied that he will come and destroy Jerusalem, and you're that mighty king in Daniel. At that exact moment, a messenger comes from Nero and tells him, the Emperor Nero's died, and he kind of takes that moment as a significant moment in his life to show that he's the promised Messiah kind of figure. That's gonna, not the Messiah, but like a Messiah in the Jewish faith, that is gonna go and become Roman Emperor. So he uses that as like a thing in his life. But yeah, so there's Emperor Nero, Emperor Vespasian, Emperor Titus, who is his son, and then Emperor Domitian, who is his other son. So, and Domitian's niece is, so Domitian, sorry, it's a lot to kind of put the context in.
I'm just wondering where this goes.
Yeah, sure. So basically you get to Domitian, so the Emperor Domitian, he doesn't have any heirs, but he has a niece called Domitilla, and he says to Domitilla, I promise that your 2 children will become Roman Emperor after me. Domitilla is Santa Domitilla in your early church tradition. I'm not sure if you've heard her name before, Domitilla.
No.
So she's a saint, she's a Santa according to the Orthodox and the Catholic Church. She's an early Christian martyr, so she's recognized as being a Christian. She married a guy called Titus Flavius Clemens, who's also recognized by the early church as being a Christian. And their 2 children are going to be raised Christian, right? If you have 2 Christians, their 2 children are going to be Christians. Those 2 children are promised to become Roman Emperor in the 1st century AD by the Emperor Domitian. So, like, why during Vespasian and Titus's reign and Domitian's reign, why do they have Christian members of family? Why does it seem like there's no persecution of Christians under their reign? Because under Vespasian and Titus, there's no persecution of Christians according to Eusebius, Tacitus, and Josephus. So that's what I'm trying to say. Like, I asked you the question about like the martyrdom tradition.
It's also persecution. Yeah, like it goes back to pagan ideas of like incorporation. So when Romans, for example, would go and they would conquer new areas and they would encounter new religions, they would incorporate the religious beliefs so often because to them it made sense to do things that way.
Sure.
Because they're like, oh, we want to know about all the gods.
Yeah.
So
is that when like say they defeat an empire and then they, I think historians have talked about them taking a figurehead of that empire and turning it into a god in their pantheon?
Yeah, they often did that, yeah. So, from their perspective, Christianity is difficult, largely because it goes against their values. It sounds a bit weird, but in the Roman sort of value system, strength is a value, like physical, like capacity to do things.
Yeah.
But in Christianity, meekness is valued. The idea that even though you could, you don't, and that really confused them. Largely because they thought, well, we know the Jews. We've had many encounters with the Jews. The Jews will fight us.
They weren't tolerant and...
the Jews will actively fight the Romans, and they did, right? And that's one of the reasons why the temple was destroyed.
Sure.
But Christians would actually rather die first.
Yeah.
And that really sort of confused them. There was also a lot of slandering. You can find stories of like Romans believing that Christians used to like drink blood and do weird stuff like that. But generally speaking, they just didn't appreciate the values that Christians had. They didn't see how they could incorporate it into an empire.
I think I tend to disagree with that in certain
Like, for example, Christians had a tradition of being very against gladiatorial games, right? Like, first of all, Christians were often killed there.
Yeah.
And for the Romans, that was sort of like an ironic thing. You know, these Christians refuse to fight, you know, they hate the gladiator games, so we'll put them in the gladiator.
What period in history are we talking? Like, war gladiator games under which emperor?
I don't know, actually. I'm not... I don't have anything in particular in mind, but in the early times, I think, anyway. Because I'm sort of aware the gladiator games were around then, and it was the Christians that stopped the gladiator games through Constantine once they actually had some
like 325 AD.
Oh yeah, much later. Sure. Because they weren't a recognized viable religion, right?
Yeah.
You weren't an understood religion until you
But
the Edict of Milan.
I think you made a very interesting point about like the Romans incorporating their enemies' gods and taking them into the pantheon, right?
I think it's like Mars or something.
So there's also like Serapis. So Serapis is he's a fusion Egyptian Greek god that was still worshipped in the Roman times. So he was a fusion of Osiris and one of the Greek gods.
Sure.
you have like Mithra, for example, who's not a god, but like a figure, right?
Yeah.
Who is kind of a fusion Persian, Roman figure. Can you not see possibly them doing the same with Jesus and kind of having a fusion Judaic Roman figure?
No, I think what we do know historically is that Constantine was sympathetic to Arianism, for example. Constantine called the Council of Nicaea largely to settle the issue of Arianism.
Sure.
And he himself was actually more sympathetic to Arianism than he was to Trinitarianism,
Sure.
to the idea that the Son and the Father were the same substance.
Sure.
But he accepted the result of the council, which was 316 bishops favouring consubstantial natures, and 2 going with Arius, literally Arius and his friend.
I'm talking like 300 years before, 250 years before Constantine. So like under like the times of the Jewish revolt, could you not see it fitting the agenda for them to incorporate one of the Jewish figureheads, turn him into a god in their pantheon, like they've done throughout wars, and kind of pacify that figure in order to fit the Roman agenda?
And you say around 70 AD?
Yeah.
Around 70 AD.
Around 70. When the Gospels are written.
Well, there's an argument to be made that they were made before that, during the 60s.
Sure.
It depends, because the reason why modern scholars say a later dating after
But
70
even
AD.
the 60s, even like the mid 60s, the Jewish revolt's happening, it's blossoming. So
Sure, it is happening then. Yeah. But we didn't know the temple was going to be destroyed. Well, I guess that's fine.
Sure.
So first of all, Paul's letters actually predate that.
Yeah.
Paul's letters are said to be, well, we'll say between 40 and 50 AD, maybe somewhere around there.
No, I don't
It
dispute that.
depends on what letter. But ultimately, in Paul's letters, you have a high Christology. He's called the Son of God. He's said to have died. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about him dying and resurrecting. He actually quotes part of Luke's Gospel verbatim. There's a part in Luke's
That's
Gospel.
kind of, but I mean, apart from that quote in Luke's Gospel, which is like kind of disputed, is there any other quoting of the Gospels in Paul's writings?
I'm not familiar off the top of my head. But
Okay.
the one that I'm
I
aware
don't think
of
there
is the one where Jesus at his Last Supper says, "This is my body, which has been given for you. This is my blood," so on and so on. I'm paraphrasing, but you can find that pretty much word for word in 1 Corinthians, I believe, chapter 11.
But do you not see it a bit worrying that that's like you can only find one quote of the Gospels in Paul's writings? Because he's meant to be like half your New Testament, and he's not quoting these Gospels. And you're saying that they're written when? The Gospels?
Well, I mean, it depends, right?
Yeah.
I would probably say 60 somewhere 60 is what I, apart from like John is probably 90.
Sure. Okay. But with Paul, for example, as well, like, sorry, you're jumping a bit topics, but with Paul, like, for example, with there was a lot of dispute between him and the early church, right? So, like, for example, James sent people to correct the teachings that Paul was doing across the Jewish diaspora.
No, that's not. No, you're referring to Acts chapter 21, verse 20 onwards. Basically, what happens is that Paul comes back with Barnabas, and they just gone on they'd gone into Asia Minor, basically, in areas of Greece, to preach the gospel. And his ministry is largely to a Gentile ministry. He went to the Gentiles. So when he came back, basically, what James says to him in Jerusalem is that they have heard rumors that he has told the Jews that they need to stop being Jewish, basically. They need to no longer do circumcision, no longer do any of this stuff. And he says in that chapter, in that very verses, he says, "We know that's not true. We know that you didn't say that, but you need to convince them that you didn't say that, because they all think you did."
So then he makes him repent in the temple, right?
And then he takes the Nazarite vow.
The Nazarite vow. So doesn't that mean he's surrendering to James' opinion that he is teaching?
Well, no, he's surrendering to the idea that he needs to do something to show them he isn't anti-Jewish. He isn't like, "Hey, Jews, you need to like give up circumcision." What he was saying is that circumcision is not what gives you salvation. But he himself is circumcised. He actually helps people get circumcised. But the point that he's trying to illustrate is it's perfectly fine to have Jewish customs. It's perfectly fine to do these things, but not in the context that it gives you salvation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But like coming to the you're saying Paul has high Christology. Like why
I
would
think so? I mean, if you look at the letter of
could you not see like Paul is pitching his idea? Yeah, Paul has connections to the palace apparently. Like because I can't remember where in the Gospels he talks about say hello to my friends in Nero's palace. So he had some connections to Nero's palace. I can try and find it. Sure. I can try and find it. But like, could you not? I'll try and find the verse. But
Yeah, sure.
could you not see him if he has connections to Nero's palace? It's in his interest, being a very Hellenized Jew.
Well, he was anyway.
He was, right, a Hellenized Jew.
Well, I mean, a lot of Jews were Hellenized because the
sure.
Greeks had taken over 300 years prior.
So I think it's Philippians 1:13.
Yeah, that's a look.
Actually, maybe it's not that one. But yeah, what I'm saying is, if he's pitching to the Romans, to the Roman Gentiles and to the Roman aristocracy, could you not see it's in his interest to pitch an Apollo-like Jewish Messiah?
An Apollo-like Jewish.
Yeah, because at that time, Roman pagan worship was very heavily leaning towards Apollo.
The issue
So
that you're gonna have-
Nero, he was very into the arts. So his favored god was Apollo. Vespasian and Titus that come after Nero, they are also very heavy into the sun god Apollo.
Yeah.
And Apollo is known as the son of God because Apollo is the son of Zeus, the great god. So he's known as the son of God.
A lot of sons.
But Apollo is like one of the big ones, and you can even see a lot of the imagery in the early church in line with the imagery of Apollo, for example. I think they found like a signet ring that was in the Mediterranean somewhere or something like that, and it had an image of Jesus that looks very much like the image of Apollo. And that's but I'm just giving an example. Like,
don't get me wrong. I think that there is crossover in the sense of there are religious people who will
try and find that verse.
Muslims, right?
Sure.
If that's meaningful, I will actually ask that do you know the first caliph of the Umayyads? Muawiyah.
Yeah.
Muawiyah minted in his own up north in like Syria, where they had mints that they had taken over. He minted coins with Christian crosses on them.
Yeah, but that was a transitional phase, right? So that was a transitional phase. It wasn't like he was minting that for that sake. He was minting that because that's how they were created, and they were familiar in the empire as being like that. So he was adding the Shahada to that as a way of slowly Islamifying it.
I thought later in Islam that you can't have symbols. I mean, showing like a caliph to make crosses seems very odd, basically.
But that's how it was minted, and like it's being used in the empire.
No,
it has a different significance.
Minted them. Like, these weren't already minted coins. He actually
but they were minted like that back then, right?
And they had his name on and stuff. You know?
Sure.
And
but
actually,
it was very quickly.
An icon of him. Sorry. This is. I won't go into that. But my point is. But
I think very quickly it was very Islamicized very quickly after that.
No, it was by the end of the 7th century, so about 60 years.
60 years, yeah, sure. But that's like a massive, like these are dinars and all of this being used, dirhams and dinars, right? Being used throughout the empire, and you can't just like suddenly.
No, you can, because he printed them.
Sure.
So, like you would have thought that, like for example, Muhammad.
Next week.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
But if we want to talk about symbology, I think.
Take care, man.
So like, the early church, one of their symbols was the dolphin and the anchor, right? Are you familiar with that symbol?
I'm familiar with the fish.
Because the dolphin and the anchor, originally what it was used for was it was used by the Seleucid dynasty during the Maccabean revolt, and it used to signify Apollo.
Okay.
The dolphin was Apollo's sacred animal, and the anchor was a ring that Zeus proposed later with that had an anchor insignia on it.
Yeah.
So this anchor and dolphin symbology is very heavily associated with the god Apollo. When Vespasian and Titus become emperors way after, in 70 AD to 81 AD, they incorporate the anchor and dolphin into their coin minting, right? So they incorporate the same symbol that was used by the Seleucids in their coin minting. This symbol is also used by the early church at the same time in the same location.
Okay.
So why is the early church using the symbology of the emperor? That's like a question I have.
Do you know what point that was?
Yeah, that would have been like 70 to 81 AD. And like, for example, the catacombs of Domitilla. So
like 71, 80 AD, they didn't have the capacity. The church didn't own anything.
Sorry, okay, let me, made a mistake, but so like there's the catacombs of Domitilla, which are some of your earliest examples of Christian iconography.
Okay, yeah.
In those catacombs, there's symbology of the anchor and dolphin.
Okay.
And Domitilla is the Emperor Domitian's niece, and the Emperor Titus's niece, I believe, as well, because they're brothers.
Yeah.
So, like the Emperor's niece is using this symbol. Okay, so Vespasian and Titus use the anchor and dolphin. So the Roman emperors use the symbol, the anchor and dolphin. The early church are using the anchor and dolphin. And Domitilla is a member of the early church, and she's a member of the Roman family, the Roman emperor's family, and she's using the anchor and dolphin. So this anchor and dolphin symbol, could you not see how the early church is associated with the Roman Empire?
Well, I mean, you could interpret that in a totally different way. For example, there are groups like Gnostic groups that openly just took all Christian stuff. They loved Christian story. They literally wrote their own gospels claiming to be from disciples.
Yeah.
The Gospel of Thomas, for example.
Yeah.
So it's not to be unexpected that there would be people that would try and do that kind of thing. I mean, it took us a while to figure out that it was a specific group that predated Christians that had done this and had taken it onto themselves.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, again, it's, to be honest with you, like I find these things a bit difficult in the same sense. Like there's a typical like atheist thing where you mentioned the god Mithra, right? You know, the similarities between that and Christian belief, therefore they're somehow inspired.
Yeah.
I no. I mean, there are things that are, like, for example, in the Old Testament, there are clear cases where the Israelite people took descriptions of pagan gods. For example, there was a pagan god who was referred to as a cloud rider, and they associated that with Yahweh by saying, actually, your god is the false god, our god is the true god, our god is the actual cloud rider, right? Mm-hmm. So they took that kind of usage and applied it to their own god. So there are cases where that sort of thing does happen, but I think when it's just, this sounds like this, therefore it came from this.
But I'm saying in like the emperor's family, like the emperor's niece is a Christian, and she is meant to heir the next Roman emperor in the 1st century AD, and he's meant to be a Christian. So the Roman emperor, there's a time in the 1st century AD, towards the end of the 1st century AD, where the next in line is a Christian. Yeah. Right. This is all happening straight after the Jewish revolt, right? Sorry?
Do you know why that didn't happen? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So Nerva became emperor, and that was because of internal Roman politics, and he is outside that family, so the Flavian dynasty came to an end.
Is it because they didn't want a Christian emperor?
No, it wasn't related to that. So it wasn't that reason. It was because of something else. It was because Domitian, Domitilla, who is his niece, the Christian, she assassinates Domitian through an assassin.
Okay.
And the night before Domitian gets assassinated, he has a dream where he says the god Apollo, that his god, like, so Domitian kind of switches from the god Apollo to another Roman pagan god called Minerva.
Okay.
And he has a dream the night before he gets assassinated that the goddess Minerva cannot protect him anymore against the god Apollo.
Right.
So he clearly associates the god Apollo with his niece Domitilla, who's a Christian. So what I'm kind of seeing from all this, is the Roman emperors that were very heavy on the god Apollo, they seem to harbor and seem to be very friendly towards Christians, seeing them as some sort of sect, maybe.
I don't think it's fair to say friendly. I mean,
but then where's the persecution for like?
I'm not talking about. I'm not saying they were persecuted like actively.
Yeah.
I'm saying they aren't considered a genuine religion. I mean, like they're considered a sect of Judaism for a long time.
Yeah, that's what.
And again, they saw them as odd and weird and icky, basically.
But do you not think that they saw them as advantageous as a very pacifist religion in a time when they're at war with the Jews, and they're at war with people who aren't integrating, people who aren't practicing their customs, people who aren't worshipping their gods, and they see these Christians and they see them as someone who is very beneficial in the war against Judaism, in a way?
No, but not really. To be honest with you, I don't see much of a thing there. I mean, maybe there's stuff that I've missed, but to be honest, like, it seems as if there are probably other explanations you can give for that are probably a lot more simplistic.
Like what?
You know, Occam's razor, right?
Yeah.
You don't multiply sufficient causes beyond necessity.
Sure.
I would say
But,
Occam's razor.
like even Justin Martyr, for example, when he preaches way after, and he's like, we're not preaching anything new, right? When he's talking to the Romans,
Right.
he's saying we're not preaching a new religion, like we're just doing the same things that you Roman pagans have done.
Did he say that? Like, in that context, like, it's
I think it is in that context, right?
If you could find me that,
Sure.
I'd be very interested. We're not teaching you anything new.
Yeah, and it's just interesting for me, like, that it's very quickly established that the early church is in Rome,
Right.
where the emperor's family are Christian, and it's just happening at the same time. It's very interesting. Like, surely the early church should be in Antioch and in Jerusalem.
Well, it was. You
Yeah,
understand that Paul went and established his church in...
Yeah, but I'm saying, why is Peter given the authority compared to those kind of figures? Why is the church based on Peter when you have like James in Jerusalem, when you have like these figures in Antioch?
Wait. Rome didn't have the like authority it does now as like the prime. Well, in the early church, yeah, like it took a while for that to develop. Basically, that wasn't an initial thing. Yeah.
And
I mean, to be honest with you, they all sort of shared, as far as my understanding anyway,
Sure.
like sort of equal authority-ish as just the patriarch, like the patriarchs. They were called the Petrarch, literally Petra meaning 5.
Yeah.
Because there was like 5 of them. Antioch, Rome, Alexander, there's 2 more. Constantinople was one, and Ephesus? I don't know, I'm a guess at this point, but...
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, you see, because one of the things I like to do is I like to study Islamic history from a revisionist perspective.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of fertile ground because there's a lot of things that are very difficult to explain in the standard way that it's explained, right?
But I'm saying, like, I'm applying, sure. But I'm saying, like, can you not see the same thing happening in Christianity? So, for example,
I'm open
here, like, you have the Jewish revolt where, like, according to Josephus, which is probably an exaggeration, but 1.2 million innocent civilians are killed in Jerusalem alone in the Jewish revolt, right? This is like a mass tragedy in first century Palestine. It's not just Jerusalem which is targeted, it's all of Palestine. And this is all happening at the same time the Gospels are written. And then we hear about one of the figureheads in this region, and the earliest we hear about this figurehead in this region is, it's written in Greek, which is the language of the conquering army. So that's like in Crimea, for example, say there's a figurehead that's fighting the Russians, and then the entirety of Crimea is obliterated, and the first thing we hear about this figure that was in Crimea, that's written in Russian.
The problem with that, though, is that Greek was the language for hundreds of years before, because again, they were Hellenized hundreds of years before by the Greeks, long before the Romans got there.
But even if you look into the figure of Jesus
Greeks
of Nazareth,
Jews were using Greek then. Like we have Greek inscriptions by Jews.
But if you look into the like preaching of Jesus of Nazareth, right? He's from Nazareth, right?
Yeah.
He's from Nazareth, which is a very poor region of Galilee.
Yeah, very small
Very
town,
small.
Village,
And when he comes back to Nazareth, after he has his ministry, those 3 years, when he comes back to Nazareth, he sees Nazareth Hellenizing, basically. So there's these new Hellenized towns popping up around Nazareth, and the whole economy of Galilee is basically shifting towards accommodating those Hellenized cities, right? And that's Jesus specifically avoids, according to the New Testament, and the tradition, he avoids those Hellenized cities. He goes across the Sea of Galilee, preaching to fishermen, people who are impacted by these Hellenized cities.
Tell me where this is found. Like, where are you quoting from?
Yeah. So I'm quoting from like Reza Aslan's book Zealot.
Okay, but are you quoting from a gospel,
from a gospel, like just the fact that he's preaching across the Sea of Galilee. His first disciples are fishermen.
Okay, so this is inferred from the fact that the places he went to that we know about were not places
which weren't Hellenized places, right?
Yeah, but
so
again,
I'm saying like why he specifically looks to be avoiding these Hellenized cities. His message seems to be very anti-Hellenized.
Do you understand how that's like really problematic though? Like that would be like me saying, did you know that Jesus didn't go to any town with the letter Z in it? Don't you think that's significant? Like, you understand how you'll laugh at me if I said that. You'll be like, come on, Chris, that's not obviously not a thing. But this is what happens when you take things and you basically go, right, there must be a pattern here.
But there is a pattern that he's specifically avoiding.
I can make patterns. Like we can all make patterns.
Yeah.
The point is that you need more than just that to validate your understanding, right?
Sure.
Because I mean, in all honesty, I could do the same with Islam, and I don't because I have to accept that there is a reason as to why Islam started the way it did.
Yeah.
Right? They have traditions, you know, and I have to give them weight, and I can't just be like, well, okay, because I think there's patterns, I'm therefore going to throw all this away.
Sure, but then there's a pattern like the fact that.
I don't want to stress your point as well, by the way.
Sure.
So you said that the gospel was written around 70 AD, about the same time that the Jewish revolt was happening.
Yeah.
The issue you're going to have there is that the oral tradition predates the written tradition. So again, like in Islam, that you'll have to figure out a way of